Welcome to Season 3 of Religion Unmuted, where we explore how religion is lived. I'm your host, Elaine Howard Ecklund. I'm a sociologist, and I also direct the Boniek Institute for the Study and Advancement of Religious Tolerance at Rice University.
And I am also your host, Rachel Schneider. I'm a religion scholar and director of the Boniek Institute's Religion and Public Life Center at Rice University. For new and returning listeners to Religion Unmuted, in this episode, Elaine and I, as we embark on Season 3 of this podcast, wanted to pull back the curtain a bit and give you some insight about the history and the vision so you can know a bit more about who we are and where we're coming from.
Okay, I want to give a shameless plug. You should in some ways stop right now, but only if you'll actually come back to Season 3. If you haven't listened to Seasons 1 and 2 of Religion Unmuted, you should go do that because there's a lot of good information there. So this podcast actually started in 2020. I know, like a lifetime ago, right? Around the time of the pandemic, the beginning of the pandemic, I remember myself and sociologist Pamela Prickett, we decided, what's really missing in public conversations about religion? And we just said, wow, women's voices are missing. And we really want to do something that brings women's voices to the table of public conversations about religion.
And now we're entering, of course, Season 3. So Season 1 and 2 were primarily about exploring what religion sounds like with women's voices turned up, as Elaine just mentioned. And in Season 3, we wanted to begin to expand more on this vision of Religion Unmuted. So both Elaine and I, we have this deep sense, right, that religion matters. Mm-hmm. It is still very important to people's lives, to their sense of identity and meaning. But then even if you're not personally religious, there's still like a sense that if you just open up the morning news, that you'll see that religion is really impacting so much about our lives, whether it's our intimate and personal lives, our political lives, our social lives. And then on a global level, obviously, it's really integral to global events. And so religion matters. And yet, so often, I don't think we have enough space in public life to have conversations about how it matters and in what ways. So we're thinking about Unmuted in a variety of ways. We're thinking about the surprising and unexpected places and ways that religion shows up in the world around us. We're looking at how religion is lived. So our tagline is where we explore how religion is lived. And that can mean multiple things. And we also just, Elaine, you and I have talked a lot about this. We just want to really we want to continue to attend to women's voices and other marginalized voices to really amplify and pay attention and listen closely to voices that we don't typically hear in public conversations about religion. So that could be women scholars, it could be scholars of color, it could be practitioners and leaders of both of those groups, and it could be also attending to religious minorities and thinking really broadly about religion and spirituality.
Yeah, just to build on that, it could also mean attending to the kind of spaces where religion shows up. Yeah. The kind of, I don't know if you can think about it this way. I think you can. Like, we're unmuting spaces, right? Like, we're letting the voice of the space speak. So when you think about religion, you're usually thinking of religion occurring inside churches or inside mosques. But we want to also attend to how religion might occur inside workplaces, even workplaces that we think of as quote-unquote secular workplaces. There's a whole lot of religion there sometimes, and it really needs to be unmuted for us to understand public life in intelligent, nuanced, and humane ways. I know you and I also, I think, share this vision, Rachel, for having difficult dialogue about issues related to religion. Yeah. I think about my own responsibilities now through directing the Boniek Institute for the Study and Advancement of Religious Tolerance. And as part of that work, I really am able to have the privilege of leading people in really hard discussions about things like religious violence and religious conflict, but also religious pluralism and tolerance. And I think in those kind of conversations, too, we want to bring a variety of voices to the table. We don't want to just go to the go-tos, right? We want to go places where, we haven't been before, to people we haven't talked to before. And I think part of what our listeners are going to find is that I hope we'll have the courage to be a bit transparent about our own stories.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think the kind of work that I'm going to do as one of the co-hosts of Religion Unmuted is certainly deeply influenced by my own scholarship as a sociologist of religion, but also by my own religious story of being raised in a very deeply religious setting, a deeply Christian background, and all of the things that brought with it. I still very much consider myself a Christian, but maybe a different kind of Christian than the one I was raised. And so just to make a point that all of these factors really come to bear, I think, in the kinds of things that we want to attend to. And so, we want to have a dialogue here with our listeners, a dialogue that's more human and humane, especially with those who are in the minority. And we want to be attentive to the kinds of ways that might mean laying down our own power in order to be in conversation across difference.
Yeah. And Elaine, you and I are both in the university. You're a professor. I have a PhD. I'm a research professor in religion here at Rice. So both of us have this very academic background.
That's right, yeah.
And so we're going to come to this podcast often. We will interview other people who are doing research on religion, but we're also going to be interviewing potentially leaders in their respective fields, other kinds of thought leaders or practitioners who have something really important to offer. And then we're going to bring our own insights and questions that come out of both, as you mentioned, our own personal concerns and backgrounds and also our academic areas of expertise and research. And so, again, just to kind of reiterate, we really want to create this podcast for listeners so that they have the ability to get a sense of what is happening on the ground from thought leaders, from other academics, and from researchers to inform their lives, enrich their lives, and, people who might be too busy to read an academic article or a book.
Yeah, we're not going to hide the fact that we're academics. We are both academics. As you said, Rachel, I'm a sociologist and you're a scholar of religion. But we are going to try to be listeners and understand that knowledge can be found in lots of different kinds of places outside the academy, outside the university. And we want to bring that standpoint to Religion Unmuted, where we're discovering knowledge in different kinds of places, both inside and outside the academy.
Do you find that religion is sometimes muted in specific spaces when you think about the kind of research and the work that you've done over the course of your career?
So the first study that I ever did was on the Catholic Church and trying to understand feminism in the Catholic Church. And I remember telling a professor in my PhD program, that I was going to study feminism in the Catholic Church for my master's thesis. And she said, who would care about that? There aren't any feminists in the Catholic Church. Religion is pretty much gone at this point. This is not going to be something that people are going to be interested in 10 years. And, I felt really deflated, but I did have mentors who were very positive as well. And, how wrong that person was. That religion, obviously now, it's well over 20 years since I had that conversation. And religion, obviously, is still very much at the forefront of the public imagination in the United States, but especially globally in these times. What I'm best known for as a scholar, as a researcher, is my work on religion and science. And, oh my gosh, in the institution of science, there is just the assumption that religion is not present, that these things are in conflict, even though there has been decades and decades now of scholarship which shows that it doesn't have to be the way that it often isn't. I remember one story is coming to mind of these two scientists that I interviewed for one of the studies. And, I interviewed scientist A and I asked him whether or not there were other religious people in his department. And he said that he was absolutely sure that he was the only religious person in his department, that there was no one else in his department who was religious. And very sadly, this particular scientist had a very extreme family loss, in the weeks before I interviewed him. And he said he wished that there was a colleague that he could talk to about his loss and the ways in which his religious tradition was very helpful to him in the grieving process. And I actually left his office. I went around the entire hallway because these are confidential interviews, so I didn't want the scientists in the same office to know who I was interviewing. Went around the hallway and actually went back in another entrance to the office next door to his so he wouldn't see me. And I walked into the office of this woman who's a scientist, and she was sitting there at her desk preparing for the Sunday school class that she's going to teach for Episcopal Church.
Oh, so they were right next to each other.
They were right next door to each other. As I got talking to her, I said, is anyone else in your department religious? And she said, oh, no, I'm absolutely certain there's no one else in my department who's religious. And these scientists were right next to each other, but that just shows, and those kinds of examples came up over and over in my studies, as the kind of just extraordinarily spirit of really almost the closeted sense that religious people sometimes have in the scientific environment. So I want our listeners to really get to know you and to get a sense of who you are and the work you're doing. So why don't you tell us a little bit about just what's animating you right now?
I'm very interested in really the dual nature of religion. So, it may seem obvious, but for me, it's this thing that I've really noticed my whole life and really struggled with, which is that religion so obviously is a great source of meaning and identity and purpose, community, beauty for so many people around the world. And yet it also often has been entangled with systems of inequality, injustice, sometimes has led to great deal of pain or harm in people's lives. And so I've really wrestled with that dualness, if you want to call it that, about religion. And that question of how can religion enable people to be their best selves, to contribute to a better world, to dream of a better world, has really motivated me in a sense of really trying to understand how that works out, not necessarily imposing answers on people, but really trying to understand. And then, the flip side of that question, which is, can we be honest as well and really reckon with religion in the way that we reckon with any other kind of social force or system in our world? I think one of the things that's really important about religion and spirituality for me is that so often when we think about how it gets talked about in the public, how it gets studied, how politicians talk about it, even how everyday people talk about it, it really tends to be focused through the lens of belief, like this is what people believe, rather than this is how people are living. And that's, in part because we have a very Protestant notion of religion in this country. But it also tends to be seen through the lens of those who are dominant or those who are elite. When we start to look at religion from a different angle, and what we think we know about religion and spirituality looks really different. When we start attending to marginalized groups and voices, when we start looking at spaces outside of the traditional congregation, when we start thinking beyond just the majority, as you spoke about, the Christian or the Protestant or even the American frame, I think something much more rich and complex comes into view that we can both appreciate as well as learn from. And I think that that's been part of my own, story, I would say, as well personally. I grew up in an evangelical, conservative, Christian background. I went to private Christian schools, and I grew up in a very insulated and somewhat insular form of religion. And that really shaped my life in both negative ways, but also, and I don't reject my background because it did give me, that was the lens through which I came to connect to and understand, we might call it the divine or the transcendent, something that was deeper and more profound that had a real impact on my life and how I developed in my imagination. So there was a lot of good. There was community. There was a real sense of who I was and where I fit in the world. But on the other hand, as I, look back and as I came into adulthood, I realized how also deeply constraining and constrictive that background was, in part because there was a lot that was put on to me as a woman, as someone who had aspirations and ambitions beyond simply kind of the roles that are often really prescribed to women within evangelicalism. And, that put me on a much different course but when I was exposed to through life experience, when I was exposed to, for example, the witness and history and tradition of the Black church in the United States, or of African theology in my time in South Africa, or, starting to think through with people who were spiritual but not religious and what they were doing, I began to have a much deeper appreciation for the complex and multiplicity of ways that people are trying to figure out and live the intersection of religion and their own life and ethics, as well as public life. And that's what I really want to draw attention to, so that we can really grapple with religion's presence in our world.
I think so many people in our world are concerned about the decline in religion, and they're perhaps seeing the cup half empty when they could see it half full, that there are new forms of religion that are giving way to institutional religion. As churches decline in attendance, meditation groups are increasing in attendance. So there's ways in which we're unmuting through this podcast whole new ways of seeing religion and religious institutions.
Yeah, I think if anything, this podcast, what I hope that it can do is shed light on how religion's lived, how religion is available and practiced and engaged with at the level of the everyday. And, I don't want to make it sound like, it's always got to be some radical new thing. I think it's just about what everyday people are doing in everyday communities. And that can be in congregations, or that can be, whether they're part of an activist group of some kind, or whether they're involved in the work of chaplaincy, and they're trying to work out big questions of meaning and purpose in, like you said, a meditation group, or through practicing yoga. There's so many different ways and avenues, but I really hope that it can help get us at the everyday, and that it can also get us at how religion looks like when we're really using all of our senses, and then bringing all of the research tools that we have at our disposal. As we'll be talking to scholars, we'll be talking to what we think are the people who have the most important research, or the most interesting or important perspectives to offer on religion and how it is lived. And we just couldn't be more thrilled to see how this season 3 is going to unfold.
So thankful that we're going to get to do this next season together.
Definitely. That's it for this episode of Religion Unmuted. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe to, rate, and review us wherever you listen. Today's show was written by Elaine Howard-Ecklund, myself, and Haley Hemstreet. Our series is produced by 3Wire Creative. Religion Unmuted is a joint venture of the Boniek Institute and the Religion and Public Life Center at Rice University. I'm Rachel Schneider. Until next time.